It's Reality Check with Craig Price.
I'm an idiot.
4 minutes in and I'm already wrong.
I'm like a monkey. Hello, look at me.
You're like a beautiful mind. I'm more like Forrest Gump.
So it's,
Craig Price is the man.
I knew it. Craig, shut up.
It's Reality Check with Craig Price. This week, Brett Judd is here to discuss entrepreneurial relationships. Thanks for joining me. We've got a great start to the new season, and I want to thank everyone for downloading and listening. It's always appreciated. But before we get to this week's podcast, let me plug an appearance I made on past guest Jeff Corrin's podcast, This Old New Business. I was there talking about how I use this very podcast from time to time to promote my business, and also some of the events that I'm speaking at. We discuss my experiences podcasting, including when I did a live podcast for NSA last year, how to get guests, and all kinds of things. So the podcast is This Old New Business with Jeff Corrin. Have a listen and let me know what you think. This week, we've got another great podcaster, Brett Judd. He and his wife, Gina, have the Fortunes and Families podcast where they help folks get through the double trouble of marriage and business. You know, being a business owner is hard enough, but having your spouse work alongside can be as difficult as it is rewarding. You know, I love my wife, but I've had enough experience putting IKEA furniture together to know that we may be a great couple, but I don't know if we'd be good coworkers. Maybe if we worked in different departments, but if we had to work together every day, it could be tough. And many couples do work together, and it can be a struggle. I know lots of folks that work together and do great, and yet others that divorce because it was just too much stress. So let's see how we can navigate the entrepreneurial waters with the ones we love with today's guest, Brett Judd. I know a lot of people who are entrepreneurs, and some are married and who have their wives working with them or their husbands working with them. What is some of the expectations you need to have before you start thinking about becoming an entrepreneur and having your spouse join you?
I think one of the most important things that has to happen really is some kind of a division of labor. I know for my wife and I, she and I hadn't done that for the longest time with a couple of our businesses and then our counseling agency that we have right now going along with our coaching program. And it wasn't until about a year and a half ago when we were introduced to the E-Myth. We started reading through that, and Gerber talks about the necessity of creating the roles and the division of labor within the business. Even if you're good friends and you're all in there, who is doing what? And Gina and I kind of looked at each other like, oh, well, maybe that's a good idea, and we should have done that. And we sat down and we just said, okay, Gina, you're in charge of all the finances and the billing and all of that. Brett, you are in charge of marketing and the interactional stuff and getting people in here. And as soon as we did that, it was amazing, because what was happening was we would have a conversation. I would think that she was going to do something. She thought that I was going to do something coming out of it, and we'd find out that we missed an opportunity because neither one of us acted when we needed to have acted. And so it was, I think, really important is you've got to define the roles within the business inside that partnership, especially inside the marriage. Otherwise, it bleeds over and there's conflict in the relationship, and that's not helping anybody.
I think it's easier for like entrepreneurs who have a business running to then find someone in their dating life and then get married, because they already know what to expect. I'm a business owner. Here I'm dating you. This is what I do. You get to know ahead of time before you make the final leap.
They know what they're getting into when they walk into it from the front.
Yeah, they have no one to blame but themselves. But did you and Gina sit down? Were you guys doing different things and then decided we're going to go into business? We've been married for X amount of years. We're going to go into business now?
No, she calls herself the reluctant entrepreneur. And she teases me that about 3 years ago, I finally came out of the entrepreneurial closet and let it out that this is what I want to do. I quit hiding it. I let that inner self out, and not to be offensive to anybody, that was the way that she put it, and it made absolute sense, because for the longest time, we've been married 25 years. It has been part of me. It's who I am. It's what I love to do, and I suppressed it. I hid it. I kept it trapped because of all kinds of reasons that were absolutely foolish. And then finally, we both just kind of gave in and said, okay, you're going to be a lot happier. We're going to be a lot happier if we just do this thing, and came to terms with the fact that I was, at my heart, an entrepreneur. I had constantly been looking at opportunities and creating, product and looking at ways to sell. I wrote a patent a few years ago and was trying to create a business off of that. And she, like I say, calls herself the reluctant entrepreneur because she kind of came along willingly and says, okay, I love you. I love this marriage. I like our family, and I'm stuck. And so she kind of accepted the fate and is going with it. And as soon as we did that, it's actually made things a whole lot easier. But there was that moment when we kind of had to sit down together and say, okay, we need to get some things out in the air because I've been doing this type of work for a long time. I don't like it. It's stifling. It's a burden to me. It isn't enjoyable. And I need to change. And she and I had such a decent enough relationship because of the skills it's really the skills that we teach entrepreneurial couples in our coaching programs, but it's because we know them. We've used them in the relationship therapy practice. We also have used them in our own marriage. We were able to navigate that water without a whole lot of trouble and she's like, okay, give up your secure state job with your state pension, with all the benefits and everything that we had been enjoying, and I will support you to pursue this thing. And that was a big leap. It was a really big leap for her.
And my guest today is Brett Judd, and he, along with his wife, Gina, they have a podcast called Fortunes and Families, and you talk about being an entrepreneur and being married. And not everybody is built to work with their wives or their husbands. I mean, it's the division of labor is great, but sometimes, also having different interests are important. So if you're getting into it for the first time and your spouse is there, how do you decide maybe we should work together or maybe we shouldn't be working together at all? Because I know a lot of people should not be working with their spouses.
That's very, very true. And a lot of people should not be. And it all comes down to, I think, the core to the relationship, what makes you tick, and how open you are to freely communicate with each other. Gina and I talk a lot about the concept of vulnerability. And, in a lot of the entrepreneurial business success books, it will talk about basically minimizing vulnerability. You want to, close off your exposure. You want to kind of harden off everything. Well, the last place that you can really do that is in your relationship. And the more vulnerable and open and transparent you are with your partner, the absolute better you're going to be able to do this. And when we look at entrepreneurial couples, whether both of them are embedded in the business or one of them is, and the other is, maybe taking care of their house or they're doing their own career, whatever it is, that entrepreneur and their partner have to be able to be very open and candid with each other. They have to be able to speak freely about where things are at. And if they get really wrapped up and emotional in that and they get super protective, that's one of the first places that we have found that couples start getting in a lot of trouble, is because they're not open and accessible to that communication. So you've got to be able, especially from the very beginning, if you're taking a leap, kind of like Gina and I did, and you're moving from one position into the entrepreneurial world, you've got to be able to have incredible, open, honest conversations with each other and keep it open and honest throughout the struggles and the chaos of that startup phase, because that is devastating.
You're talking about that startup phase where it is all chaos and stress, lots and lots of stress.
Right.
I am a reluctant entrepreneur. I believe me, if someone came along and offered me a 6-figure salary, I'd jump in a second. But it's one of those things where, because my brain is not a business brain. I'm much more of a creative side. I do the work really well and I present really well and I have the great information. The sales and marketing is, my weakness. But if it's one of those things where there's a lot of stress. And especially when you first start off, because you don't really know, you hope that it's all going to work out and you build towards something stable. But those first 6 to 18 months, you are basically out there on your own, either just the two of you or by yourself. How do you keep that stress compartmentalized and not bring it into downtime? Because I know that just working for myself, that stress can often bleed into when my wife and I are together, just on vacation, and now if it's both of us doing that, I can't imagine. There'd be a murder-suicide.
Right. I was listening to Cliff Ravenscraft podcast Answer Man yesterday. He's got a really incredible episode out right now that he talks about something that I think answers your question beautifully, and it is the necessity to look at your time, especially as the entrepreneur, and compartmentalize it. He talked about how he was he'd burned the candle at both ends. He was running full tilt for a long time, and the toll that it was taking physically on him. And what he was talking about is so very, very true for a large percentage of startup entrepreneurs and even, long-term entrepreneurs. And what tends to happen is we burn ourselves out. We become emotionally exhausted. We're mentally exhausted. And what happens is we're not accessible to our partner. Gina and I, we use a term that we use all the time, and it's, are you there for me? ARE of the R is an acronym for accessible, responsive, and engaged. And this comes from emotionally focused couples therapy, and Dr. Sue Johnson created an amazing process there. But that question, are you there for me, is really the fundamental question that we're asking our partner all the time. And one of the things that I bring in is I talk about it from the entrepreneurial world, and how when we learn the skills that we need to have an effective marriage or relationship, we've actually gained the skills we need to really drive forward our business, because that's the same question that our customers are asking, are you there for me? And it's the same question that our employees are asking, are you there for me? Can I trust you? Are you, invested in me? So if we are exhausted, if I haven't been doing my own self-care, if I'm not going to the gym, if I'm staying up late at night and I'm not getting rest, I'm going to start closing off. I'm not accessible when my partner needs me. I'm definitely not responsive. If I'm exhausted and I was up late working on something and Gina needs me, I'm not as responsive because I'm consumed with my own stuff. And if I'm not engaged in what she's doing, and so what happens is we tend to pull back, and all of a sudden there's a rift that starts happening in the relationship that we didn't intend. It's not like I got up one day and said, yeah, I don't need this anymore, and this is a real drag. We creep into it because of these competing demands on our needs and our attention. So you used a word that's really important, and that's compartmentalize.
Like the question I have, because is that it's hard enough when you're just one person doing that. So but when you have two people who have the same goals, who are working at the same business doing that,
right?
Because now all of a sudden, the things that you're focusing on are similar to what she's focusing on. The stress that you're having is exactly the same stress that she's having. So how do you, when you both have the same situation and you're both in it neck deep, how do you try to, because I understand how it works with one person, but how do you when you both are in that same situation?
Sure. And it comes back again to that word compartmentalize, as well as that vulnerability, being able to have a conversation and being honest, open in that conversation, and say to each other, you know what, I'm terrified. I'm busting my tail. I'm doing everything I can. I'm working this, but I have to tell you, and I want you to honestly hear me, that I'm really scared right now. I'm stressed. I'm frustrated. And that seems counterintuitive. And a lot of people will say, that's the last thing in the world I want to tell my partner, because I need to show them that I'm solid, that I'm committed, that they can handle this, and that I'm all about it. I can't show them at all that I'm worried, but it's actually the very first thing that they need to see is that you're honest, you're real, that they can talk to you at that deeper, intimate, emotional level about really what's going on. And so that's one of the first things that has to happen, is you've got to be able to have that honest conversation with each other and be able to hear it. and be able to listen to each other at what's being at that emotional connection. The other thing that we really try to do in our relationship, and I think is really critical, is that we compartmentalize our time. When I'm off work, I'm off work. I schedule time for my family. And when I get home from the business, or when it's time to quit, I'm home and I'm here for dinner, and I'm here engaged with them in the evening when our boys are doing their homework. Now, maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, I might jump back on and I'll finish a project for a little bit. But I don't let it consume me, and there is a blocked out boundary that says, this is when I'm at work, this is when I shut that off and I come to my family, I come to my partner. That is a critical piece for most entrepreneurs that actually is very difficult, because, especially for a true entrepreneur, I have experienced and found that that's really hard for them to shut off. But if you want to be in a relationship, it's one of the things that's really important, to give the relationship its time the same way that we give the business its time.
Well, I know so many entrepreneurs that are on their second or third wives, and it just shows you the stress and the plate spinning, I guess you would have to do with so many relationships.
It's a great way to put it, the plate spinning. Yeah, for me, when this really opened up was in 2013. I went to the GKIC Super Conference in Orlando, and Gina and I had teased the idea of the entrepreneurial relationship work and branching out into that. But it wasn't until I was sitting there at Super Conference and I started meeting these absolutely amazing people, driven, focused, very successful, and many up and coming, want to be successful, will be successful entrepreneurs. But they started talking about what we do and what our messages are like. Oh my gosh, where were you a year ago? I wish I'd have known this in my first marriage. I wish I'd have, and divorce was just rampant in that room. And it was part of many of the presentations off of the stage. And I thought, this is crazy. There's got to be something can be done. And that's when we really pushed forward with this idea. And it's stressful. It's chaotic, and really what breaks down is what we were talking about a minute ago, that are you there for me? We end up in our stress being consumed, and we pull away from our partner when what they really want from us is to pull into them. Let me share some of this burden. Let me be part of this with you. But we many times get afraid. We don't want to show them that maybe things are tight. We don't want to show that vulnerable underside. And so we kind of close it off, and then they can't reach us. Now we're not accessible to them. Our partner becomes afraid. Our partner starts to have their own distancing because they feel somewhat abandoned by us. That's the conundrum that many of the entrepreneurial couples find themselves in. And that is really the root to much of the divorce issue that happens.
Do you think entrepreneurs start looking at their relationships like a business and start doing like risk assessments and, should I cut my losses, and are more likely to pull the trigger on divorce than to actually work it out? Because it's,
yes.
It's like a vendor. If a vendor's not doing a good job, I'm going to go to another vendor.
Yes. You touched on two different ideas. One, if I treat my relationship like a business, I teased that idea with my kids a couple of weeks ago because I'd kind of heard that battered around. Like, we are not your employees. Do not treat me like an employee.
No, that's exactly why you had kids. That is a free labor force, and we all know that.
Well, and that's what I teased them back as. Is okay. And here are the things I don't have to continue to pay you for, right? But they're
going to unionize, man. I'm telling you, these kids it's Norma Ray all over again.
Yeah, they're going to be picketing the driveway, and it'll be a mess. But they were talking more about we don't want you to treat us like we're in business. Yes, my son is incredible. He builds a lot of websites. He does a lot of backside stuff with code for me. He's amazing. I've got another son who is editing, my podcasts and getting things put together. They're great, and they come to it desiring and willingly. But they didn't want to feel indentured or like they were in a business. And my wife is like, we are not employees to each other. Do not start putting spreadsheets and timesheets. And you can get very mechanical. And that's the problem if we start bringing the mechanics of business into the home, is it starts to lose that openness and that connection. But on the other hand, there are some things like you were talking about. In business, if a vendor isn't doing what they need to, we look for another vendor. If a customer or a client isn't meeting our expectations or doing things, we fire the client, and we move on and say, you know what, I can't meet your needs. I'm sorry. Here's somebody who might be able to. If we bring that attitude into the relationship, it's going to be doomed from the very beginning. One of the things that I've said about that for a long time is that if we start treating our relationship the same way that an entrepreneur treats a startup, there would be far less entrepreneurial divorce, as I've yet to meet an entrepreneur who is not doggedly passionate about that startup. I've seen them, purge every possible financial prospect to keep something afloat. And yet, when it comes to the relationship, when it comes to the marriage, so many times it's almost second fiddle, and well, we can bail. I'll be better off without her. I'll be better off without him, or they'll be better off without me. And I'm like, I don't understand that. I don't understand that, because in other places in the life, they're just doggedly tenacious. I'm going to make this thing work.
Yeah, I think it's that startup mentality. I'm going to get this thing up and running. Mm-hmm. They don't see it as I'm going to be doing this for the next 45 years of my life. They said, I want to get this up and running, get it profitable, and then either pass it on to somebody else, sell it, do something. But you can't do that with your wife. Well, not in most states, but you can't get things going up to speed and then say, hey, this relationship's really good. Let me give it to Dave. I'm going to sell my wife to Dave, and then I'll start up another one. And I think that's where that mentality can often bite you in the butt.
It can. You have to go into it the same way. I just forgot who it was. Maybe you can remind me. Knowing the end from the beginning. I can't remember if it was Covey or Ziegler who talked about having to define your end before you ever start the thing out. Where do we want this thing to go? Where do I want this business to end? Am I building this to franchise out? Am I building this thing to sell? Knowing the end from the beginning. If we take that same thing when we define our relationship, when I go in and say, I want to get married, I want to find somebody to spend my life with, and we clearly define, I'm spending the rest of my life with this person, and this is a life partner. It's not a one-off startup event that I want to pass on when it's bored. We have to take that mentality and move into it, that I'm creating a family. I'm creating a lifelong partnership. I am committing myself to this with everything that it needs from me. Otherwise, you're doomed from the very, very beginning.
Is that why there's, and maybe it's perceived, but is that why there's so much infidelity in entrepreneurship? I feel like a lot of the entrepreneurs that have been divorced, it wasn't just because it fell apart. It was usually, they moved on to the next startup.
Partly. But there's a deeper thing with that. And in one of the episodes of our show, we've talked about the anatomy of an entrepreneurial affair. And it's kind of an interesting little situation because there's an old book. It came out in the mid-'80s called His Needs, Her Needs. I've loved it, and I've used it many, many times with some of my clients. But His Needs, Her Needs, Dr. Harley, talked about this idea of a love bank. And it's the same thing that...
Is that like a spank bank?
The spank, no.
No, it's different?
No, it's totally different.
Okay.
So it's exactly the same thing that Earl Nightingale talked about. We move towards that which we think about most. If things are stressful at the house, if I'm not fully engaged and I'm not there for my wife, and I go to a convention, I'm the keynote speaker, I'm giving a presentation, and all of a sudden people are coming up to me and I'm getting accolades and I'm getting all of this, reward. I'm going to be drawn to that. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh, you guys are putting a few deposits in my love bank. I like this. My wife, on the other hand, is missing me. She's nagging. She's wondering where I'm at. Why am I on the road again? Those are huge withdrawals. I'm going to be drawn towards the account that has the most investment and interest in me. And so if I'm not focusing on the connection with my wife, if I'm not really giving Gina what she needs and demands, not demands, but deserves, it would be very easy for the relationships that we have at work, the relationships that we have with our mastermind partners, the relationships that are open and accessible and incredibly rewarding. Is if you're a successful entrepreneur, there are people who just absolutely love you. Well, now all of a sudden it's really easy to go out to lunch. Now all of a sudden it's really easy to spend a little extra time after the business closes to work on the books. And the next thing you know, you're in this intimate relationship that you had no intention of getting into. You didn't want it and you weren't seeking it, but because you open the access through that being drawn to, they become there for us more than our spouse is there for us in our minds. And the next thing you know, you're in an affair. It's incredibly easy to walk into if we shift the attention of where we're at. I had a client once, it's kind of we were in a marriage therapy situation, and he was an incredibly successful farmer here in our area. And his wife was done. She was tired. She was exhausted. They had a nice home. They had nice cars. He took care of them well. But I listened to him talk about this mistress, his farm, the cows, the hay fields, everything that he did, and how he did all of this in his mind. He thought he was doing it for her, to provide well for her. What she wanted was for him to be able to go to the boys' basketball games once in a while and to actually be home for dinner every now and then. And he had lost sight of what was really important. And I listened to him go on and on about this, and I looked at him and said, "How long have you been having an affair?" And he looked at me with shock and like, "What are you talking about?" I said, "How long have you been having an affair with your tractor?" And he was dumbfounded. I literally thought she was going to jump out of her chair in delight because somebody got it. And and finally his eyes kind of opened up and he's like, "Yeah, I guess I have, haven't I?" He had moved his emotional allegiance and all of his attention, all of his energy to that farm, the tractor, and where he spent all of his time, and in essence had abandoned his family. That's what she was feeling. That's what the boys had experienced. And he realized that the fancy car, the really nice home, and the thriving, active farm had totally missed the mark for what he needed to have done. And then the saddest part, and this is something a lot of entrepreneurs get themselves into, he said, I could have hired a high school kid to come in and run the tractor for me in the evenings, and I could have gone to those basketball games. I could have come home and had dinner and hired this out for what it is costing me. And I think that that's a really sad thing that a lot of entrepreneurs forget, is that you can hire out a lot of things very inexpensively and get yourself back home where you need to be and with the relationships that deserve you for not a whole lot of expense. And many times you're going to get yourself further when you do that.
Well, I want to leave on a good note, because that's kind of a sad, depressing. What's one of in the 25 years you and Gina have been married, what is one of the more fun things being entrepreneurs has allowed you to do, or something that you guys celebrated?
One of the things that it does for us is it gives us the ability to be connected in something that each of us are deeply passionate about. And, back when I was a professor at the university here, I would go to my job. She would go to the counseling agency. We'd come home. We'd see each other. Now, we have a very unified vision together. We're passionate about that together, and it gives us something that we can really come together on. We also, because we're equally unified in this, we go to the same mastermind meetings. We have the same friends, and we have met some of the most amazing people through this adventure. And that fills us. And it really brings us a lot of amazing satisfaction to have those people in our life and to just sit back and we drive past our office and there's just this little satisfaction like, that's ours. And we've built this. And how cool is that? And it's something neat to share together.
Well, the podcast is Fortunes and Families. Obviously, it's available on iTunes, but if someone wanted to talk to you and reach out to you for not just the podcast, but for you do coaching and you do a lot of other things, where can they find you?
So you can go to fortunesandfamilies.com, and there are links there to a lot of the things that we're doing. You can also go to just brettmjuddmsw.com. And that's where I do a lot of my personal stuff, my personal coaching, my blogging, even my show that I have in the podcast is all linked into there. And that's the easiest way to get a hold of me. Or they can send me an email at brettmjuddmsw@gmail.com and just ask it, or reach out that way. I'm totally open to that.
Thanks again to Brett for taking time out to talk to me today. Remember, follow us on Twitter at RealityCheckPod. Download the app for goodies and more. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, and Kindle, or head over to realitycheckpodcast.com to learn more. All comments, questions, and guest suggestions can go to Craig at speakercraigprice.com. See you next week.